Welcome to Ekascloud and this webinar. This is Jarish. In this session, I'm going to explain how to change the lost private key with a new SSH key pair for EC2 Linux instance. To connect to EC2 Linux instance in AWS Cloud, you need the SSH private key. If it is lost, how it should be replaced. That's what we are going to see in this session. Directly, we go to the hands-on part. First of all, I'm going to launch one Linux instance. I have connected to my AWS account via the AWS Management Console. And my console is connected to AP South 1 Mumbai. And now I am in EC2 Management Console. I'm going to use only one availability zone, which is AP South 1A. So with the AMI provided by AWS, I'm going to launch one instance and I'm going to name it as Linux 1. And you know that when you launch an instance, the instance will have a EBS wallet. And it is very important to have a security group at the time of launching the instance. And to connect to the instance at the time of launching, it will ask to create a key pair, which is private key and public key. The private key will be given to us by AWS and the public key will be placed within the EC2 instance. Now, I don't have any running instances. I'm going to launch one instance with the name Linux 1. I'll click on launch instances. I'll go with free tier. You can use any Linux. I'll go with Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8. And I'll choose T2 Micro, which is free tier. And in third step, just to match with the architectural diagram which I have, I am placing in a subnet which is in AP South 1A availability zone. Then in fourth step, I'll go with the default values and I'll give the name tag as Linux 1. You can create a new security group or you can go with existing security group. I'll go with the existing security group called Demo SG, which has SSH to connect to it. Then I click on review and launch and I'll click on launch. At the time of launching, for this first Linux instance, I'll create a key with the name first key. And I'll save the key in my desktop. And I'll launch this instance. So we have did like this. So now I have a instance with the name Linux 1, which has a security group which allows SSH. And at the time of launching the instance, key pair gets generated and the public key will be placed by AWS within the Linux operating system and private key is given to us. I have the private key in my local computer in my desktop. I named it as first key, and the public key will be placed by AWS within the Linux instance. Because it is a Linux instance, we know that there will be a user called EC2-user, and the public key content will be within the EC2 users home directory. It will be in /home/EC2 user. Within that directory, there will be a hidden directory called .ssh, and within that, there will be a file called authorized file, authorized_keys. So with the private key, now we will be able to log into this instance. You can see the key name mapped with this instance's first key. Still the instance is in initializing state. We'll wait for a few seconds for the status check to come to 2/2. Now the status check becomes 2/2. So now I'll try to connect to this Linux One instance using the public IP address. So I have the key in my desktop. So I'll use my PowerShell command line and change my directory to desktop where I have the key, first key. And now I'll use SSH-i first key and the remote user, which is EC2 user, and the public IP address. I'll be able to log in securely to this Linux One instance. But the demo which I am going to give is, what if you lost this key? So I'll myself delete this key from my computer. So because now we don't have this first key, it is not possible to log into this instance called Linux One, which I launched little earlier. Now we are going to see how to change the key pair to connect to this instance. In order to do so, you have to launch one more EC2 instance, which is like a recovery instance in the same availability zone. I'll tell you why you need to launch in the same availability zone little later, but it has to be launched in the same availability zone. Now I'm going to launch one more Linux instance, which is going to act as the recovery instance. I'll name it as Linux 2, and I'm going to create a new key pair. So I'll click on launch instance. I'll go with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Again, go with T2 Micro. I'll put it on the same availability zone. This is very important. Then I'll go next. I'll give the name tag as Linux 2. I'll use the same security group. It's not mandatory to have the same security group. but you just need the SSH rule to connect to it. Then I click on review and launch. We can't use this key because this key is no more. So I'll create a new key pair for this instance. And this is the key pair which we are also going to use for the first instance. I'll name it as second key. I'll click on downloads, download key pair. I'll save the key in my desktop and I'll launch the instance. Because the first key is no more, because it is lost, it is not possible to log into this first instance. But the instance which I launched now, which is going to act as the recovery instance, because I used the new key pair, now I have the second key in my local computer. With this key, I will be able to log into this instance. Still, it's not possible to log into this instance because the old instance still have the public key content which belongs to the old private key. So now to do the recovery, I'll log into this recovery instance. Which is Linux 2. It is still in initializing. We need to wait for a few seconds. Yeah, now it's ready. So I have logged into the second Linux instance. So the key pair for the Linux 2 instance is second key and its public key. Now to do the recovery, what you have to do is you need to detach the hard disk, which is the EBS volume of the first instance, and you need to attach it to this recovery instance. For this, you need to stop the Linux 1 instance. Without stopping, it is not possible to detach the root volume of the first instance. So you have to stop the Linux 1 instance and detach the volume and then attach it to the recovery instance which we launched. Why we are doing so? Because we are going to replace the old public key with the new public key which we have in Linux 2. So now I'm going to do like this. So I'm going to stop the old instance whose private key is lost. I'll stop that. I'll detach the EBS volume from the first instance and I'll attach it to the recovery instance which I launched, which is Linux 2. You can see now both Linux 1 and Linux 2 are in running, and both Linux 1 and Linux 2 will have volumes with the same name tag. If you try to detach the Linux 1 volume as of now, it is not possible to do that because the instance Linux 1 is running. So you have to select the Linux 1 instance and you have to stop this. Once the instance state completely changed to stopped, Yeah, now you can see it is changed to stop. Now you can go to volumes. You can now detach the root volume of the first instance. So the state should become available. So now you can attach this root volume to the second Linux instance. That's what I have asked you to launch the recovery instance in the same availability zone. You will be able to attach the EBS volume only in the same availability zone where the other instance is running. So now I'll attach the root volume of Linux 1 to the Linux 2 instance. If you look into the hard disks of Linux 2, this is Linux 2 instance. Now you will be able to see two hard drives, XVDA and XVDF. The public key of the Linux 2 instance is in /home/admin/.ssh authorized_keys. Very similarly, the public key of the old Linux instance will be in /home/admin.ssh authorized_keys. Because this volume is now detached from the old instance and it is attached here, we will be able to access this file, but the new disk which we have attached, it is not yet mounted to the second Linux operating system. So what we have to do is we need to mount this XVDF2 partition to this Linux instance. So to mount a partition to the already existing directory within the Linux, normally we use mount the device path, which is XVDF2 and the mount point. But because this is also the root volume and both Linux 1 and Linux 2 created from the same AMI, the UUID will get conflicted. If you just try mounting this, you'll get an error. So to ignore this, you have to use -o option and you can say no UUID. If so, without using the UUID, it will mount the XVDF2 partition to the MND folder. Now, if you use ls-blk, you will be able to see /mnd, which means this hard disk is now mounted within this operating system inside /mnd. You will be able to access this /home/admin/.ssh/authorized_keys file within mnd. So what has to be done is, we know that the new key pair which we have created for the Linux 2 instance is in /home/admin/.ssh authorized_keys. Now we will copy this key and we will overwrite the old key, which means we are changing the public key content of the Linux 1 instance EBS volume with the new public key. So I'll use cp.ssh authorized keys, and I'll use /mnt because the first instance hard disk is mounted to /mnt. There will be a directory called home, and within that there will be EC2 user. Within that there will be .ssh. So it's not admin, it will be EC2 user. Within that there will be authorized keys. So which means now both the new instance public key and the old instance public key is same, and that got generated when we created the second. Now after doing this, after copying the public key to the first instance hard disk, now we can again detach this hard disk and we can again attach back to the first instance. Before that, to safely unmount, you can use umount/mnt. Again, if you use lsblk, xvdf2 partition is unmounted. Now I'll detach the volume which I attached it to Linux 2, and I'll again attach back to Linux 1 instance. Once after doing that, both the instance will have the public key which got generated when we used the second key. So we will be able to use the second key and we will be able to log into both Linux 1 and Linux 2. Now I'll again come back to volume section. I'll select the Linux 1 volume. I'll go to action and I'll click on detach volume. Once it become available, again you can go to action, click on attach volume. Now we have to attach to the Linux 1 instance which is in stopped state. While attaching, because it is going to act as the root volume, you have to type the device name as SDA1 or XVDA. I'll go with SDA1 and I'll click on attach. Now this volume is again attached back to Linux 1 instance. So if I go to instances and if I select the first Linux instance and if I start, so the Linux 1 instance is also going to be in running state. After a few seconds, again the status check once it comes to 2/2, you will be able to use the second key and you will be able to log into the first Linux instance as well. In this way, you will be able to recover the or change the private key when the old private key is lost. Now with the second private key which I generated, I will be able to log into both the instance. I have already logged into the second Linux instance. Now I'll again open one more PowerShell tab. I'll use the second private key PEM file. With the public IP address of the first Linux instance. And I'll log into the first Linux instance. So in this way, you will be able to log into the instance with a new private key. You can follow the AWS document, connect to your Linux instance if you lost your private key to do the same. It is said that you need to stop the instance because our instance had EBS volume. It is a persistent volume. After stopping and starting, our data will be still permanent. But if you have instant store volume, there will be data loss. Once after restoring or once after changing the private key and logged into the first Linux instance, if you don't need the second Linux instance, you can terminate this. But for me, because I was just giving a demo, I'm just going to terminate both my Linux instance. Normally for the root volume, the delete on termination will be enabled. So delete on termination for the volume will be enabled. So the EBS volume should also get deleted. But make sure both your volume is getting deleted. Yeah, you can see the volume for Linux 2 got deleted, but still Linux 1 volume is there because it got detached and again attached back. So it's not getting deleted once the instance is deleted, once the instance is terminated. So you have to manually do this. That's it for the day. See you in the next webinar.